All right, at this point in time, all the breakout rooms are closed, so hopefully everyone made it back into the main room. Thank you so much to all of our breakout room leaders for leading the various breakouts. Really appreciate it. Hope you had valuable conversations. I know I definitely did in my room, so hopefully it's the same for everyone else. So the next topic that we're going to cover, now that you've talked through the various age groups and how to provide high value content and got some tips and tricks for those age groups, we're going to talk about some common challenges that are often found. So myself and Stephanie are going to sort of tag team this presentation for the common challenges section. So here we go. So Stephanie, I believe this one is yours.
Sure. So a couple of things to start thinking about when you're not sure what you want to do, or if you're just nervous about getting started. So partnering with others who have more experience is a really great way to kind of get your foot in the door and get that experience so that you're more comfortable then leading things later. So whether you are engaging with other ITE members that maybe have more experience, or in our high school breakout group, one of the things that we were talking about was that somebody had mentioned was, partnering with universities. That's another great way to do this as well, because the faculty as well as the student chapters, they have outreach agendas too. So there's lots of ways that you can partner with others. And then practice makes almost perfect. So I think the main thing is don't expect everything to go perfectly, and it's totally okay when it doesn't. So, we have done so many different outreach activities here, and I would say probably none of them have gone exactly how we thought they would. But, usually that leads to something that's even more interesting and a good teaching moment. So, don't worry about that. It does not have to be perfect.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Stephanie. Some other common challenges that volunteers come across is the program coordination logistics. So this is for those who are wanting to do maybe regular programming, whether it's weekly, monthly, even just annual, streamline those logistics as much as you can. So if you're doing volunteer coordination meetings, have a standard agenda for those, have a standard agenda for your program events themselves, right? So for example, for my high school outreach program, we always start with introductions and icebreakers, then we do a technical presentation, we have our hands-on activity, do a leadership moment, and close out, right? Having a standard agenda makes it easier for the volunteers to be able to coordinate those logistics every single month. Use a standard presentation slide template. Don't make all your volunteers have to recreate it every single time. Send those out in advance, makes it so much easier. And then use reusable materials so that you don't have volunteers having to go out and buy more every single time you want to do an outreach event. Makes it much, much easier. Another common challenge with program coordination are all the policy logistics. So for example, many youth organizations and schools require background checks for volunteers or some sort of volunteer clearance, right? So make sure that you're asking those organizations what they need and by when, and making sure that you give your volunteers enough time to get those things done by the time the event's going to be happening. If you need to train your volunteers, make sure, for example, if they're working with an age group they're not familiar with, make sure you give them a little bit of training heads up. Even if it's 10 minutes before the event, make sure that you're walking them through those things. Other things to think about are photo video waivers. There are regulations in many states and areas around how you can use photos of children, right? Particularly if you're wanting to put them online. So make sure that you're asking for those parent permissions about photo video waivers. And a good tip is to always just take pictures in a way that strategically keeps the children's faces out of it as much as possible. It helps quite a bit with the usability of those photos. And then finally, risk release. You may need to consider, if you are bringing children to your facility, whether or not there needs to be a risk release associated with that, and vice versa. If you are going to someone else's facility, if there's any sort of risk documentation that you need to complete. So just something to think about and make sure you don't forget. All right, another common challenge is volunteer capacity. We are all professionals, right? For the most part, and we have other things on our plate other than just this volunteer. activity and outreach. So make sure that you're delegating and distributing the tasks in bringing these programs to light amongst your team. You know, rotate the leaders for each meeting and event so it doesn't always fall on the same person. Play to each other's strengths, right? If you have someone who's really good at making marketing materials and someone else who's really great at leading STEM activities, play to those strengths, make it easy for everybody. And then openly communicate needs and support each other. If you have a particularly busy month, make sure you're telling your other professional volunteers that you need a little bit of extra help and be willing to help others as they get those needs communicated. And then finally, very important is to balance the accountability of your volunteers while also understanding that they are volunteers, right? Really important that you find whatever right balance that is for you. Obviously, you can't have folks just up and not show up, right? But also recognizing that this is a volunteer activity. So just something to think about as you're working through that. All right, something else that can be a common challenge is inconsistent student attendance. So one way that you can sort of combat this is to work to build the relationships between the students themselves and between the students and volunteers. So whatever engagement you can build into your programming that helps to do that can help to make sure that they have a connection with the programming and with the volunteers and that they come back on a regular basis. Another thing to think about is identify potential causes. Is there limited transportation on those days? I talked about like the after school programming bus, right? Maybe there's conflicting school events or exams during that time. Just timing in general within the school year or the time of day. Maybe you're having marketing issues. Maybe you're having low interest in a specific activity. These are all things to think about that might make that a little bit easier. All right, and this one is Stephanie's.
So, you know, I mentioned early on that you don't need to expect things to be perfect, but sometimes things may go like totally not at all how you've planned. And so you have to be able to pivot in that moment. You can have challenges like the age group is different than you've expected. I have arrived to some outreach events on many occasions when, you know, I thought it was one class of fifth graders, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we thought this was such a great opportunity. Now it's all our fifth, sixth, and seventh, or it's first through fifth, or whatever. So, you know, you end up with an age group that you really weren't thinking about, or you might have more or fewer students too, depending on what may have happened during that day at the school. When you don't have as much time as you thought that you might have, so I always try to think through with whatever activity it is that we're going to do. I'm like, okay, so let's say something happens here and I can only do half of this. You know, what are the key things that I want to make sure we get across, and how can we really kind of ratchet this down so that it's something manageable that students can do in a much shorter time period, but they're still going to get something out of it. And when you don't have enough volunteers, this can really create a problem for you if you're trying to do something really interactive. Particularly with younger grades, it may be really very difficult to do something if you don't have enough people to support that. And so you may just have to kind of shift gears and say, okay, well, you know, I'm either going to have to just accept that some of this is probably going to go off the rails, and that's going to be okay. I'm going to bring it back at the end with, you know, we're going to do more of like a roundtable conversation or something to get everybody back in the same way of thinking. Or you may just have to say, all right, I'm not going to be able to do this piece right here because I really need more help to be able to do that. So you just have to kind of think ahead and expect lots of different things might turn out differently than you were anticipating. And then when something's just not working for the kids, so you may have planned something to the nth degree and you think this is going to go great, and then you realize that for whatever reason the students just are not into it. So being able to shift gears and do something different. So again, I think the most important thing is to over plan and have way more stuff ready to go than you actually are going to use. Because if you've got other things that you can quickly just shift to address any of these things that might have occurred, then you're not going to be stressed, and that outreach event is still going to go well. So Another case, so we started talking a little bit about when students don't seem to be very interested or not engaged. A lot of times it's not necessarily that they aren't interested or wanting to be involved. They may be shy. They may feel like maybe this is something they can't do. They don't have the confidence. And so really trying to pay attention to the signals that you're getting from students and gently encouraging them to get involved can be really successful. So, and I say gently encourage them because you certainly don't want to keep, hey, why aren't you, you don't want to call somebody out in front of everybody and keep going back to them over and over and over, because that's just going to make things worse. But, if you can just kind of stand beside them and say, hey, so, what are you interested in? And what do you like doing? And then connect that to what they're learning in that activity, that can really help. And again, we've talked about having some backup ideas in your toolkit, because that just can be incredibly helpful for making sure that you're ready no matter what. And then engaging ITE student chapter members. I think this is something that absolutely everybody should take advantage of if you have access to an ITE student chapter, because college students, from the perspective of K-12 students, they are super cool and they will listen to whatever they say. So you may try saying something and they completely ignore you, and then the student says something and they're all on board. So ITE students are an absolutely essential resource, I think. And so we've talked about timing issues, and again, thinking through that activity and looking at ways that you can make it longer or shorter, depending on how it goes, because you really never know. It all depends on what the background and experiences of the students that you're going to be working with. And it may be that they have done something similar, and so they are, on point and, kind of ahead a step, at every point in that process. And so they get finished earlier. And so having some way to extend the activity, or, if you have a group of students that really wasn't ready for it, and so you had to do a lot more kind of background stuff with them, figuring out, well, what is it that would still make this a good learning opportunity if I have to really make it a lot shorter. Accounting for the prep time that you're going to need is very important, particularly if you have to set stuff up. So you might have to actually get to that classroom or that after school program, 30 minutes or even more in advance to make sure you're ready for students to be able to start right when they arrive. And then you also need to think about that cleanup time too, because depending on what you're doing, you may have all sorts of stuff in places that you didn't expect when you're finished. And so I'll give you an example. This is a picture of Connects kits. And those little gray pieces that you see right there that are holding the wheels on, those things fly off everywhere. And we spend a lot of time at the end of every activity sweeping the floor looking for all of those, because they're super important. Your car is not going to work if you don't have them, and we don't want to lose them. So making sure that you're really thinking about all of those kinds of things is important. And then providing that concise wrap-up discussion and those key points that you want students to walk away with, so that you're ready at the end to just wrap everything up and make sure they know what you wanted them to get out of it. And hopefully that is what they're also taking away. And just being ready to switch gears. If something doesn't work, you don't want to keep trying to do that same thing. So just go ahead and say, okay, moving on, and figure out a different way to approach it.
All right, and now we have Mohaved's going to be presenting some helpful resources. So feel free to introduce yourself and we'll get those resources opened up while you're doing that.
Hey, hello everyone. So like Jennifer said, my name is Mujtaba and I'm a city traffic engineer here at the city of Roswell in Georgia. I sure hope that you have been enjoying your time in the webinar, especially the breakout sessions. What you see in this slide is basically listed a few references. Inside each one of these, we have a plethora of additional information and resources. So I'm gonna just go through these, and Jennifer, hopefully you'll help me on these. So, and this is the first page, which is the IT's web page, and this committee have developed it and managing it, and you see how nicely it's sorted in there from pre-K to high school and beyond that. Will contact us, and more information as you go through. You can click on each one of these and it jumps on to that section. As you could scroll down on the page, it comes up with different types of activities that you can do for each level and grade. So again, additional links are also provided in here from other agencies, and at the end some videos. If the second link is developed by the Mid-America Transportation Center. This is pretty cool too. You can filter the types of activity, and you can search for names. Let's filter by maybe for 7th grade and just search for what comes up, because I know in the middle school, one person asked for specifically for the age group, how can I find different resources? So here, let's say traffic jams or other things, but in here, when you it basically provides you all the information about that type of activity, and then go down and then maybe click on yeah, sure, lesson files, click on that, open it, and it goes through all what this activity is about, and then questions, the timing, and everything. So that's just one example. I've already played on this web page. It's pretty cool though, the types of activities they have. It's a structured, very arranged in a nice way that anybody could use. Teachers, and as well as those who are doing the outreach. And this is another one that is for pet safety aspects, and this is done by Federal Highways Safety Office. And again, similar, but specifically focused on pets. You could maybe, I don't know, let's connect our community. Let's, yeah, well, it's a workshop. On top, it says it takes 20 minutes maybe, and then number of people that need to be there, and then additional pages. It's some graphics at the end. So take advantage of these links, and they'll probably be showing up in our website as well. And it basically, any one of these examples will take you throughout the steps from the beginning to the end of it, but you just need to be, going through it and not just reading it. That's the main part of it. And of course, at the end, us, the members of the committee, feel free to, ask us any types of questions. Anything comes up, we'll be more than happy to be helpful. Of course, we wish to be. But that's what we got for now. Anytime, please reach out. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks so much, Mohaba. And with that, we have time for questions here. It looks like we've got a couple minutes. Are there any general questions from those in the audience?
I have one.
Great, thanks, Mike.
I have a neighbor who teaches at a school where there are kids with lots of different backgrounds and different languages and things like that he has to deal with. How would you approach a school like that?
A really great question. So my recommendation would be, if you learn that that's the case when you're talking with the teacher, is to ask the teacher what their recommendations are. They work with these students day in, day out, and they likely have suggestions for those coming in on what's going to work best for them, whether they have translating resources, right? Or if they recommend pairing them together with other students or separating them so they can get additional help, right? They'll know their students and what's going to work best for them. It's a really great question though.
Yeah, if I can add to that too, Jennifer, I think that's one of the areas where it can be great to get students involved, because in the colleges, a lot of students are coming from different backgrounds, speaking different languages as well. So they may be able to help out in the classroom and provide the ability for participation at different languages as well.
I'll just mention that we have had some STEM events where some of our student chapter members have actually delivered it all entirely in Spanish because the students that we were working with, well, and really it was more the parents that were part of it too. The parents had more of a language barrier than the students did. And so, yeah, I totally agree that this is a great opportunity to work with your student chapters.
Any other questions?
Jennifer, if I may, I just wanted to address, we were kind of cut on time in the elementary school breakout room. So if there's no other questions, can I have just a minute to finish addressing the issue?
Sure, we've got 3 minutes left if there's no other questions. Sure.
Sure. So one of the items that they were saying was that it's always nice to hear from a real world engineer that's not been glorified as somebody that just invents stuff, right? And so I want to say that there's a lot of truth and validity to that. We want to make sure that we don't overly complicate it. And while we want to show them the cool aspects of what we try to solve and how we follow the scientific method in a real world application, it's always good to show them a little bit of what I do. This is what I do with bikes. This is what I do with PEDs. This is what I do with roadways or light rail or whatever mode of transportation you're in. So and for the elementary group, if you had any additional questions or comments, please reach out to me in LinkedIn. I'll be happy to continue the conversation and taking your advice into consideration. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gabby. And with that, if anybody on this call has questions, as Mochaba mentioned, the STEM committee is happy to serve as a resource. Please feel free to reach out to us and we'll help you get connected with the right resources or answer your questions. With that, if there are no further questions, we won't belabor the end of the webinar here, so you'll get those 2 minutes back in your day. Thank you all so much for participating, and thank you to all the speakers who participated today. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.